From Music for All and presented by Yamaha, welcome to Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music. On this episode, we explore issues of equity through the lens of SEL. We welcome founder and artistic director of Sister Cities Girl Choir, Kennedy Center's citizen artist, and president of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, Alysia Lee. And now, our host of Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, Scott Edgar.
Welcome to the next episode of Teaching Social and Emotional Learning Through Music. We always brag about the amazing guests that we are able to have as part of this series. And once again, we have the honor of upping our game. We have Alysia Lee, who is doing such amazing work in music education, most notably directing an amazing choir in Baltimore called the Sister Cities Girl Choir. I cannot wait to dig into what social and emotional learning means to her, what this looks like in her world, and the amazing work she's doing to further the necessity for equity in music education. Alysia, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. I feel so honored to be here and to be one of your guests, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Because I know that it's been just such a wonderful journey that's recently changed. So a little bit of your life, both inside and outside of music.
Absolutely. Well, whenever people ask me to talk about my journey, I got to talk about where I come from, where I started, my roots. So I grew up here in Baltimore, Maryland. My parents both were born here. My mother grew up in Massachusetts, but her parents met really right down the road from me at Morgan State University. And my father grew up and was born and raised here in Baltimore on the west side of town. And so when my parents met over in Alabama at an army dance, because my dad was in the military, they both were from Baltimore. And that connection of like, oh, you're from Baltimore too, really helped their love to foster. So Baltimore is a big part of my identity and what's important to me. And Baltimore is a city that has an incredible art scene, incredible singing happening here. We have Morgan State University's choir. I grew up going to hear them sing as a kid. There's 1,000 churches in Baltimore City, and churches are known as being good or bad based on the sound of that choir. And so I just grew up with music kind of all around me. My dad was in a boy band as a kid. So on Sundays we would clean the house because that's what Black people do on Sunday mornings. But then we would sing, we would sit around and play records for hours. And so this idea of like making music with other people has always been a part of the way I thought of music making. I was working and teaching and performing, and I learned about Elsie Stemma, and that was in about 2011. They had just recently played at the Proms, the Simone Bolivar Youth Orchestra, and someone sent me a clip, and they were like, "Look at this! What do you think about this?" And I was just blown away. I mean, it was one of those experiences where I was like, "Uh-oh, something is different," because I experienced this, and I experienced it in a YouTube video. I wasn't there in the call. People were losing their minds. If you haven't seen that clip, anybody that's watching, like, you should watch it. People are in the audience literally losing their minds. And why are they losing their minds? Well, number one, it was a youth orchestra playing not standard youth orchestra fare, playing complicated music, that we expect from top-notch professionals, playing it perfectly, if that exists, if perfection exists, and also playing it with a sensibility and a narrative, a collective narrative and expression that we just hadn't seen on the orchestral stage before. I mean, these young people were really tapped in and focused on a shared emotional piece around that. They were playing Shostakovich, and of course they're very known for playing mambo, and everybody's flipping the clarinets, but also the Shostakovich in that concert is so incredible. You can tell they're all playing as one voice. It's so emotionally riveting. Now, I've been to a lot of orchestra concerts, and I had never seen anything like that before. It was what I always imagined classical music could possibly be, which was the same way that I know everyone I know is a classical musician. I was trained as a classical musician, and everybody that I went to school with at Peabody, for instance, we all were so passionate about this music. But that level of passion, I mean, people are devoting their lives to the craft around an instrument, right? That doesn't often get reflected in the way the music is performed and received by the audience. And that's the nicest way I have of saying that sometimes it feels underwhelming. Not the accuracy of the playing, but like what else is there? You know what I mean? And this was, I think, for me, like that was arrived to see an ensemble that was really working collectively to express. It was very exciting. And then I learned about El Sistema, right? This music program that had been happening for decades in Venezuela. They were producing top-notch talent. Gustavo Dudamel, of course, is their most famous alum. And he had just kind of taken on the helm at the LA Phil. So it was all very exciting. And the founder had started a fellowship at the New England Conservatory with a partnership with TED, and they were looking for classical musicians that were interested in social change. And I was like, that's me. That's me. That's me. Like that thing where the music is transformative. Months later, some lady watches it on YouTube and is like, that's me. That's the kind of music making I want to be a part of. And I believe strongly that young people can harness that kind of power. And that's where we've seen it. So I applied for the Sistema Fellowship. I got in, of course, and was the first singer to be a part of the fellowship. After that, they accepted singers every year, which was really exciting. And and then went on to create and build Sister Cities Girl Choir in Philadelphia, spread to Camden, and now to Baltimore. And Sister Cities is a youth empowerment choral academy serving young people, investing in the power of youth energy, knowledge, wisdom, and creativity. And and so my most recent educational job was working at the Maryland State Department of Education, where I was overseeing the fine arts office. So that's music, which I love, but also dance, theater, visual art, and media arts. And really helping the agency to think deeply about equity and excellence, which was our motto at the time. So how do we enact equity in arts learning spaces became, I think, the hallmark of my time there. Now I have just started a new position. I'm at the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, and I am their inaugural president. So this is a new foundation that uses public dollars. We dispense about $12 million annually to organizations that are serving youth in the city of Baltimore. So really exciting work and a great way to just continue my passions around youth and racial equity.
Alysia, such a journey, and I know it's just starting. I mean, I cannot wait to see where all of this manifests. I don't think I knew the depth of the work that you've done with El Sistema. So many people who we're finding right now are finding some intersections with the El Sistema movement, Sistema-inspired programs. In fact, another series that you were on, the Save the Music Student Empowerment Through SEL and Music Education series, we just had Jonathan Rush from the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra and Isaac Sinnott here to talk about how movements such as El Sistema can help people see themselves in a space where they've never seen themselves before. So they look at that orchestra, they look at that professional choir and say, I can't be a part of that because I don't see myself in that group. Does that resonate? Has that been part of your journey?
I think it started there. I think Sister City started with that in mind, and we've shifted our thinking just by being in such close proximity to folks to really think of music education as an opportunity for students to elevate their musical skills so they can express music in however they want. But I remember in the beginning of our journey, it was very much like, we've got to preserve these traditions and invite more people in. And now I don't really care about that. I don't care if there's classical music traditions continue. I more care about that young people that want to express themselves musically have tools. And so I do believe that a lot of pedagogy is about like us sharing our process with others. So this is the process I know is the choral tradition. And also I'm hoping that like the choral tradition I've experienced, that one of these young people take it and turn it over and it's something completely different. You know what I mean? We do want to hear new things. So but I would say that's how we've kind of changed. And that's very humbling to be like, maybe it doesn't really matter if these kids see themselves as, if they see themselves as future orchestral members, or professional singers, or opera singers, like maybe that's not important, but maybe what is important, maybe, and these are all, these are ideas, but maybe what's really important is that, um in terms of the musical space, there's other non-musical things that are important too, but in terms of musical space, I want to hear music that defies genre. I want to hear like something I've never heard before. I want to hear something I've never heard before. um I remember being in the sixth grade, and Mary J. Blige's "Real Love" was her first single off of the album, "What's the 411." I remember hearing that song, and I remember being like, "This is this is a revolution." We had never heard like hip hop beats with a singer on top. It was like the first, she's the queen of hip hop and R&B. So uh, I that's what I want to hear, but something new. I want to hear music that is different. And I think we all do. Like I josh around with kids all the time, like, the music that comes on the radio. I'm always like, just so you know, that is connected to, that has a historical piece. And it's, this, yes, okay, we were doing this in the 80s. I'm always joshing with them about that. But there are new things happening, especially in popular music. And it's in the concert world is slower to receive innovation. And so, I think that, hopefully, I'm hoping like these L systemic kids across the world, like they, instead of just being like carriers of our traditions, they become creators and innovators. Yeah, I want to hear something new. I want my head to explode. And I want to be excited. And that means it could have a violin in it, sure. But it could have, I don't know, some spoons. I don't care what the instrument is. I just want to hear something fresh, new, authentic. Like we all want that. So that's kind of how our L Systema journey has shifted a little bit, where we're really thinking about, just letting the kids dictate more of what's important to them in the space, and we're just here to share skills and resources.
It's such an important distinction. You talked about in your first answer this idea about going to a concert and being like, it was clean. It was, it was correct, but it didn't have heart.
Right.
It didn't have soul. It didn't, where's the connection with the kids? It's what I often call, we were janitors. We cleaned the notes, we cleaned the rhythms, we put it out there on the stage.
I love that. That's very interesting. I mean, how many times have I shown up at an orchestra concert? This is across the country. I don't want anybody to think I'm talking about any symphony in particular. But a lot of us have shown up at concerts. We're very excited because we're classical music enthusiasts. Oh, I can't wait to hear. And as soon as those lights go out, you look around, everybody's asleep. Okay, everyone is asleep. And technology has a lot to do with it as well, because we can hear perfect versions on, at home on my iPad with my. So it's like, what else? I often bring into, as an analogy, when Beyonce comes to town. People don't know a lot about Beyonce. Beyonce doesn't talk a lot about things. She just does things. So she doesn't tell you like, oh, next year I'm coming on tour. She's just like, here's the tour dates. And people start screaming like, oh no, she's coming in 2 months, And the tickets are expensive, of course. It's Beyonce. But I tell you one thing. People are not going to miss out. The music that she's singing, number one, she's singing songs she's been singing. She'll sing a song that she's been singing since 1998. We already know the songs. There's no new albums at this point, okay? The last album, it's come out. We know the pieces she's going to sing. In many cases, the set list gets leaked. Still, I will not miss a concert. If she's in town, I will not miss it. If it's my mother's birthday, I'm bringing my mom along, okay? That's in the end. We're not having anything else. And that's the kind of excitement about music that there already is in the world. And we just have to figure out thing in the concert world, like, how do we get people to have that sense of like, I have to go to the concert tonight because something's going to happen that is different. There's an experience awaiting me that if I don't go, I'll never get again. So, also when Beyonce goes on tour, you'll see people at the concert and you're like, didn't I see you in Boston? You're like, oh yeah, yep, I was in Boston and now I'm here in Baltimore and she's at Madison Square Garden next week. Do you have a ticket? Oh, me too. Because we know it's going to be different every time. I'm going to see something different. I'm going to have a powerful experience. It's going to be worth the effort to leave the house. In post-COVID world, that effort to leave the house piece has got to be strong because we've all become very comfortable sitting at home and learning how to use our internet tools in ways that we didn't before. So, I think for me, it's about the narrative and the story and the personal experience of being in the room with the people who are making the work. So the more that this is such a soapbox moment, but the more that concert artists start to share that vulnerability, make space to break that wall to say, this is why this piece is powerful to me. Too often, when we have people up talking or program notes talking to us about classical music pieces, we start with the dates of the composer. That's so backwards and bizarre because when we all pass away, if somebody starts talking about you and they're like, tell me more about Tracy. And they're like, well, she was born in 18. It's like, sounds like she lived a very boring life. Yes, you want to know the historical piece so that you understand the context of when this person lived, but that's not the most important part of any person. I've never sat around with my family and talked about a family member who's passed away and they started with their dates. That's bizarre. It's weird. Tell me about what this person's worldview was, what made them excited, what brought them joy, what kept them up at night, why they decided to write music to express those ideas. That's what we want to know. We want to connect with humans. And then we also want to know, and why are you performing the piece? When you heard the piece, what drew you in to say, oh, this expresses something that connects with my being, right? And classical musicians have that. The world doesn't know that, though. We don't share that vulnerability. And so that's what's on this. I think that's what's on the stage next is we have a lot to learn from classical musicians, concert musicians. Let me not say classical. Concert musicians have a lot to learn from the pop music world. People go with their feet, right? And so you got to engage people. You got to get people excited about the narrative and about the work.
100%. So to me, the discussion we're having right now is identity. The identity of that classical tradition of that that it's based on predictability. It's based on you come in, the lights go down, the tuxedos come out. There's a 5-minute overture. There's a major symphony. There's a solo work that start. There's a predictability that has, for many, many people, said, okay, I want to have that unpredictability. My question is, to me, we're breaking down the big T word, which is tradition.
Tradition.
And it's so hard. Why is the worst thing to do anything? Because we've always done it.
We've always done it.
And we're doing it. And we keep doing it. How do we break down that tradition?
Yes, I think we break down tradition by understanding the harm that tradition causes. So in the best possible world, we can think of our approach as more fluid and that we understand the roots and histories that create or have gotten us to where we are, but we make space for innovation. We stay porous, we stay flexible, okay? And also acknowledging, like, if we didn't allow the classical music heroes that we love, if we didn't treat them like they were geniuses, meaning you have the authority to break tradition, then we wouldn't have a lot of the music that we enjoy today. And so every time we do that to young people, every time we box them in, no, don't do it like that, nah. We stop the genius from flowing. So I do tell teachers frequently, treat all your students like they're Mozart. Would you tell Mozart that was wrong? Or would you say, can you explain to me what you're trying to communicate? Why did you choose to do it that way? And they might say, I just made a mistake. Okay, well then let me help you, right? But you never know what kids are capable of, especially kids, because their potential is so limitless. But we do we smack it down. And then classical music training is shifting, but is frequently about accuracy, right? So a lot of our classical music favorite players are folks who have found that way to bust through that and have the accuracy and the emotion, but that is available to all of us. And so, I think there's a lot of really brilliant people right now thinking about how do we make the training different so that the individuality can come through and people can still progress technically, the technical ability can progress. What does that look like? So I think there's some, hopefully there's some some momentum in that area. But definitely in the K to 12 space, it's an imperative. In the K to 12 public space, this is not a conservatory, mama. You must be investing in the creative potential of your students. Your students should feel at all times this art class, music class, theater class, whatever it is an opportunity for me to develop my critical thinking and my creativity. And that's the bottom line. If the classes you're teaching are not doing that, they're just recreating music, for instance, by performing. Performing is a wonderful process. It's one artistic process in the National Core Arts Standards, right? It's an incredible process, right, for learning. But create is one too. Create is a process as well. So students must be expressing themselves in your music class musically. They must be. That is what they're called to do. And if you go to the cafeteria or recess, you see them doing it all the time. Okay. Every middle school cafeteria I've ever been to, somebody's in there banging beats on a table and getting in trouble or something, right? So kids are capable of doing that, not because they're young people, but because they're humans. And human beings, this is how we express ourselves, through movement and voice and telling stories. And so we have to make space for that in our classrooms. When our music classrooms become little spaces for oh my gosh, for janitors, is that what you said? Oh, the harshness of that is so intense, and I love it. We cannot, I think just thinking that, it's like, oh, is that what I'm doing here? Am I just training kids to clean up? It's like, instead of to beautify the space. And the answer is clean up the space and make it pretty. Do both. So we gotta do both and. We have to do both and we gotta acknowledge too, there's not a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And I would say put your time into more creativity then. Less performing, less, your concerts might get shorter. Okay. Yes, we may have to present shorter programs at adjudication. It's fine. Great. But your students will absolutely, well, we're going to talk about all the benefits.
We're heading there now, my friend. And,
yeah.
So many of the things that we're talking about flexibility, talking about vulnerability, talking about putting my authentic self into a piece of music. Those are all skills. It doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So I'm curious to hear how we can intentionally embed some of these skills, and maybe an example of how you do it when you're in front of an ensemble to really get the students to be creative. Because, when you talk about the 4 core arts, we talk about the creativity, we talk about performing, connecting, responding.
Yes.
I think that the create one is one that, from a teacher perspective, if we don't come from a background where that's been modeled for us, the anxiety goes up.
Huge.
This isn't how How do we get our students to create and be vulnerable?
Yes, I think there's two things. Number one, we have to realize why that anxiety goes up. And the answer is 100%. We have been taught that certain people have a right to create music and certain people don't. And most of that is rooted in tradition, yes. But is the idea of, like, if you have a certain level of music literacy and proficiency, then you can elevate yourself out to be a composer. When a composer should be a person who has wildly imaginative musical ideas. What does music literacy have to do with that? Music literacy is a skill we can acquire. But, if we just allow people to write books based on who could read the best, that sounds terrible. What a terrible idea. We would never, who would think of something like that? But in music, that's what we do. So there are so many people, the reason our anxiety goes up is because it may not have been verbally told to you. Like, it doesn't mean you had an experience where you were like, can I write a piece of music? And they're like, no. And you're like, can I please have some more? No, that didn't happen. But it was communicated to you that you are not a composer. You are not that. You're something else. And to be honest, something lesser than that. Okay. So that message, we've internalized those messages, about who's worthy of creating things. I think unpacking that is very empowering, because then we realize that it's just lies. It's just lies. We were told lies. The people that we love lied to us, and that's okay, because somebody lied to them too. And so it's like, it stops with me. I'm not going to tell those lies to other young people. I'm not going to tell them that the things in your imagination don't deserve to be shared. I'm not going to do that to somebody. So I think when it's like that, I see teachers kind of softening and being like, yeah, that is the emotional reaction I'm having. Is that there's a wound there that I didn't realize was there. Then the second piece is, we have gaps in our knowledge about how to do that. And a lot of that was kept from us because we were on performance tracks, or, even if you were in a conducting track, which it's an interesting way how people become conductors. It's like strange in some ways. how people get kind of diverted to different areas. It's just odd, So that's number one. Number two, once you then have that why, and I think people do need a why when they're making a shift. You have to understand this is a pedagogical shift. It is not like, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna just do some composition exercises. It's not that. This is a change in the way you think about what the purpose of music education is. For me and my background, my family, and our deep connection to Baltimore, and also to social justice, and specifically racial justice. For me, education and justice are very closely linked. But when I started to think about this work, this way of operationalizing the National Core Art Standards in my job, right? That became my job. And I started to think about the creative process and all the limitations that we have as music folks to why we can't do it. I started to see those oppressive models, those that deficit thinking all over that. And I was like, man, I don't want that. So once you have your why, and you're starting to think, what if all students, all young people throughout learning had affirming experiences constantly to say, your imagination has a lot of great ideas. What if young people had an opportunity throughout school career to work together and work collaboratively with other people to take ideas and turn them into things? That is the kind of space that is exciting to be a teacher in, but it reminds us that these are the building blocks of revolution and transformation and the evolution of society that we all agree the society needs to continue to elevate. And so that elevation now can come from more folks who've been empowered to believe that their ideas can become things. So with that shift in mind, then it's like, okay, all I got to do is learn some skills. I can do that. I can do that. I can learn some facilitation skills. I can learn how to not take up so much space when I'm teaching. And I can get feedback on that specifically from folks I care about. I can build professional learning communities where I can intentionally, because arts teachers need professional communities of learning. And I'm not talking about our professional associations. Those are great too. But you need a pod of teachers, and your fellow teachers have it. The third grade team gets together at lunch and they talk about, right? The arts teachers are sitting there like, I don't have anybody else in here but me, right? But you need a core group of people who understand the content that you're teaching and that have similar ideas about pedagogy. You need space for invite them to come see you teach, to give feedback. And that's something you can build over time with intention. And that's something we've done at Sister Cities, was be very intentional about building those networks for the betterment. I was like, I can't be the only person giving feedback here. I'm busy. Okay. So how can everybody here be giving feedback and be helping everyone to grow? What would that look like? So teachers can do that too, because you can make friends at the conference and be like, hey, do you want to be in a professional learning circle with me? Right. So build that. Then number two, figure out where your gaps are and get some skills. For us, it's been around, in 2018, we made, as a way of deepening our practice and in direct relationship to my work at State Department, I was telling people, this is what is required by law. It's required by law that you are investing in the creative process in your classroom. And people were going, yes. Now, the theater people weren't doing that. The theater people were like, oh, you mean I have to devise theater? Okay. Right. And the dance teachers weren't doing it because they were like, you mean we should choreograph? Yeah, we do that. That's what happens. But our music folks and the visual art teachers, most were like, a bigger swath of them, the music, was like, okay, great. Yeah. So we'll be exploring skills and ideas, but then kids make artistic choices. So we shouldn't see like, a full bulletin board of, Starry Nights, but if you want to explore a skill in there and then allow students to use that skill, right? That's the idea. They can create, right? There was a little pushback, but people were like, I get it. The music people and some dancers were like, no, I'm not doing that. We have these, my kids are trying to make all state, all national. We're trying to do this. We got this. We don't have the time. We don't have this. And I was like, but it's required. I don't know how to do it, but there was a lot of excuses. So I started doing it in the only place I was still teaching, which was at Sister Cities. I was like, well, I have to do this somewhere so I can see what are people coming up against. And it is hard, but it's possible. We set an art strategy goal in 2018 that by 2024, half of the music we perform will be original work. Specifically because of all these things, right? It's undergirded with social justice and empowerment and unpacking the kind of colonizer tentacles around music making. And it's been transformative for our organization. It's been transformative for every classroom that has fully adopted it and implemented it. Just very, very powerful work. Selfishly, for me, I can say I feel better about the work I'm doing because I'm doing that. Now, we started that, I'm gonna tell you, a year, and I was like, man, are we really gonna have? Maybe we should go back to say a quarter, because this is a big commitment. But it's been an incredible journey collegially to work with my colleagues and do this together. It's been an incredible journey, of course, to see the young people step up and elevate their tools for expression, and for them to be able to share what they have to say. It's been powerful. It's been, life affirming. And we really got rocking and rolling with the student part, because we gave ourselves 6 years to make this change. We got rocking and rolling with the student part right when COVID hit. So to have these affirming opportunities in the middle of that time, to feel like we were building connection and belonging during that time, I was like, man, I'm glad we made that shift back in 2018 so that we were ready to do this, and we could never go back.
That's curious. You say you can never come back because you're in the middle of that paradigm shift. You've tasted what the other side tastes like and what that looks like. And more importantly, I'm guessing you've seen the look on the students' faces when they say, this music, that's me.
Right.
That's me.
Right. That's me.
And that's that taste. But it does take a leap of faith.
It takes a leap of faith. That's right. And also you have to walk the walk. So obviously, hopefully it's very clear. I like to walk the walk, not just, be telling people what to do. So, I tell my students to do things like, okay, this week, carry a notebook around with you. When you have a big feeling, jot it down. A big feeling could be a happy feeling, like, maybe the boy in class turned around and asked you for a pencil and you felt special. Or it could be a sad feeling. It could be anything in between. And so when I was telling my students to do that, I had to do it too. Right. And that's how I wrote the first piece of music that I shared publicly with the world, which was Say Her Name. And for that piece to be kind of embraced internationally as a vehicle for building dialogue in communities about racial justice is very powerful. So, modeling, again, sharing my process with my students, modeling that for students. And the reason I think so, just to also answer the first question, which was about why should we integrate SEL? When COVID hit, as a state government employee, I got so many emails from Silicon Valley saying, we have an SEL program. You can buy it, and then the kids can practice SEL for 15 minutes a day. And my inbox was flooded because people knew, like, oh, there's going to be trauma-informed care went from being something we only thought about for urban kids to something that we thought about for everybody. Maybe rural kids a little bit too, right? But definitely there was always like an income piece, right? Lower socioeconomic status folks. Suddenly it was like everyone's experiencing a collective trauma. We need trauma-informed care. We need SEL for everybody. I think it was much more clear. Side note, we needed it for everybody all along, but COVID exposed things that were true to be truer. So when you extrapolate SEL and have kids practicing, SEL is essentially like learning how to be a better human, right? Learning how to interact socially with folks in a way that still feels humanistic. That's the emotional and social part. That's what humans are, social and emotional. When you pull that out and say, practice doing that now go back and just do whatever. Bizarre. Bizarre. It sounds like a good way to make money. Yeah, it sounds like a good way to make some cash. But there's no learning happening in there. There's nothing happening. It has to be integrated in school policies. It has to be integrated in the school community, and it has to be integrated into learning. Now, I don't know what they do in other content areas. I know there's a lot of research on that, but I can speak directly about the arts. It's easy to do when we accept that we also must create, when we make opportunities for students to work collaboratively and explore ideas from existing repertoire, to understand the social and emotional component of music that's already written, right? When they're performing a piece. So if your students, if you ask them, why did this composer make this choice? And they're like, I don't know. They have no idea. That's an opportunity to integrate some SEL into the study of existing repertoire. Then when we're writing repertoire, when we're composing, all of the components of SEL are so clearly brought. Music, when we're writing music, we think about, first of all, art elevates itself in community. So almost every visual artist that you've ever known and loved had a community of artists that they were reflecting with, that they were talking about ideas with, that they were sharing their work with and getting critique and feedback. We need that as well. So this is an opportunity for you to take your classroom and turn it into, I don't know, the best Frida Kahlo artist bazaar in the world, right? Where all of your students are engaged in the process of making and creating. They're giving feedback to others. They're philosophizing about the big ideas and the pieces that they're perhaps exploring for the repertoire that already exists. They're reflecting maybe on those same ideas. Okay, well, this is what Beethoven thought. What do you think? Okay, great. Can you let's do a songwriting afternoon about that, or let's improvise about that theme or about that idea, right? So about ideas, when you use ideas, it just draws out from students all of the things we're looking for. We've seen students elevate the way they think about their thinking. We've seen students beg for assessments. Can we pause here? Can we stop? Can we pull out the rubric again? I just really gotta wait a minute. I just think can we go in breakout rooms so we can just share the phrases with each other and try to figure out, just ask some clarifying questions. These are middle school students begging for assessment. Okay. We've seen students, of course, being able to work more collaboratively with one another, feel a sense of inclusion and belonging in the space, right? You belong here. Your voice matters here. Doing it through the music. We don't pause and have discussion circles about other topics. We don't do that. We center it through the music making. And that feels intentional. That's why the kids came. That's why they're there. They're there to learn music, right? And it feels humanistic and well-rounded, a well-rounded approach to music ed.
Alysia, you just blew my mind when you said what you said about SEL in the music classroom is easy when we create. And I think that's yeah, I think oftentimes we get trapped into, well, there's this model of the rehearsal and how do I fit that? And sometimes that feels like a square peg into a round hole.
Yes.
When we start to think in terms of student voice, amplifying student voice, student empowerment, thinking about how do we expand and give students more choices, that's when things just start to feel organic and natural.
Absolutely. I mean, I think take Beethoven 9, for instance, right? These themes of brotherhood, sisterhood, human connection. Your students, first of all, we spend time with kids. Kids have opinions on everything, okay? It does not take much to elicit an opinion from a young person. They have opinions on things they barely understand. They have lots of opinions, okay? But to think about, like, okay, well, what do you think? This was Beethoven's worldview, right? This is what this piece is putting out into the world, this idea about, and we know, there's some historical context to be extrapolated there too. What do you think the message to the world in 2022 needs to be? What's the message that we all need to hear in 2022? I'm sure it would have something to do, if you talk to young people, it's going to be something about COVID. They're going to talk about some of the racism that has become more discussed in their school. So anti-Asian hate, Black Lives Matter. They're going to talk about that. They're probably going to talk a little bit about the the resurgence or whatever they're calling that thing that happened with the when the terrorists came to the Capitol, whatever people are calling that. They'll probably talk a little bit about that, right? This idea of a fragmented country. Kids hear us. They watch TV. They have Teen Vogue. They know a lot of things that are happening. I bet you they'll bring up some of those things. And then what if they, that same concert, maybe you're collaborating with the local symphony and you're doing Beethoven 9, then also you can have another night, Beethoven 9 is February 12th. And then March 15th at the school, you can have a listening party and kids could have worked collaboratively to create string quartets that explored the things that they wanted to share about with the message that people need now in 2022. So that would be a way to take the music that you're learning and just dive into it instead of around it, right? Now, the cool thing is your kids are going to play Beethoven 9 better. They're going to sing it better because they have a personal, when music is relevant to us, when we understand not just like, oh, it's cool, it's pretty, okay? When it's relevant, when I understand its relevance for me personally, then I first of all, I pay attention more in rehearsal. I practice the skills I need in order to succeed to execute this, right? I understand, okay, now it's like, oh, I have to play scales every day? I get why. Because I want to be able to play this passage like he wrote it so it's clear to the audience. This has to be clear, this message. So I'm going to do those scales that my teacher told me to do, right? All of that is connected. So it's not I do this and then the music suffers. It's actually a way to also further a lot of that intrinsic motivation that we're seeking to engage students in, and to also set students on a path to really be seeking in their own improvement, right? To be independent learners as much as we could have them be. How many times have we even, do people still do practice logs?
I hope not.
I remember practice with my little clarinet, and I did practice a lot because I'm that person. But most people just write then the dates and then your mom signs it. Okay, but what if it was like, oh, I can't wait to practice because I know that the way that I'm doing that section at rehearsal B, I'm not doing that section well. And my teacher gave me an exercise that I can use to elevate my skill to play that well. And I want to play it better because it's important to me that it's clear, that I'm communicating clearly to the people I care about who are coming to see the concert. That's why you should practice, not just because your teacher told you to, but because you're connected to your artistry and it matters to you. And so I think that's what we all want to see. We all want to see students that are like, not waiting for us. My teachers used to say things like, this is rehearsal. We don't rehearse in here. You rehearse on your own. Then we come here, we rehearse. Okay. So basically they were trying to say, practice on your own. And we were all like, I don't think so, buddy. I'm not practicing for choir. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not doing that. And so if students feel very drawn to those ideas, that is SEL, right? And especially when you add collaboration. Anytime you can bring in some of these collaborative learning structures, I can't be convinced otherwise, are rooted in dance and musical traditions. If somebody disagrees, even if Kagan himself told me that's not what I did, I'd be like, you're making it up. Because it's all folk dance and musical ensemble structures. So put kids in those structures and have them not just talk about, oh, the piece and what you like, but the ideas in the piece. Put kids in those structures and have them work together. And, that's the way to think about, okay, well, this is the second part, how can we improve the way we work together? So on Saturday in rehearsal, we sent kids into breakout rooms. We are, we're planning a big event and young people are going to be leading a lot of the components. When they came back, they had to report on, each committee had to report. And then another person who's not the reporter had to give the report on what did you see, or what did you hear in your group so that you knew that everyone's voice was being heard. Someone had to share that, right? It took an extra 15 seconds, but it makes it so that everyone's understanding that, and before they went in, I told them that they had to do that. So that sets up that piece. And we often include process-driven things like the way you're collaborating, not just that you are, but the way that you're collaborating, the way you're communicating. We often include that in our assessment tools. If you're working collaboratively on a songwriting piece, and let's say in the beginning, we may have enforced this idea that everyone's voice was heard. Everyone had an opportunity to have their voice heard. And then some people never said a word. Did we do that? No. So at the end, let's talk about that. So was everyone's voice heard? And some people say, well, I never said anything because I was feeling nervous. Okay, well, who has some strategies? What might she do next time so that we can make sure we hear from everyone? Okay, well, I did realize now it's a safe space, and maybe I should have taken the risk to kind of come forward. Okay, well, that seems good. That seems good. All right, so you guys are gonna. That's the assessment on that. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can still assess SEL in the musical space as well. And I think when you combine that intentionality and the assessment, you can't get better than that in terms of an SEL learning experience. When you just have the SEL on the side and there's an SEL reflection or assessment at the end, or exit ticket, forget it. But when you're integrating it into the process, and then kids can see, okay, the next time we did a song, we know we're trying to elevate we're trying to elevate these musical skills, but we're also trying to make sure everyone's voice is heard. So, okay, I'm noticing Tracy is not saying anything. How can I encourage her and let her know that we'd really like to hear from her? Tracy, we haven't heard from you. Are we moving too fast, or should we take a moment of rest so that you can really kind of get your words in? And Tracy can say, you know what? Yeah, I just need a few more minutes to kind of look at my ideas and figure out what to share. Okay, well, everybody, let's take 5. That is youth leadership in action. And because they're building those skills intentionally in the music space, they can also think about they can think about other people, they can enact the skills, and then at the end they can assess and reflect, because Eric Booth tells us if we don't reflect, the learning doesn't happen. We can reflect back and see how we're growing. Wow, this time everybody participated. Wow. And then we can say, oh, did that elevate some of the music ideas? Oh yeah, look, because now we've got something really different happening in verse 2. The last song we did took a long time to get verse 2 done, but this time we got it done a little faster, or this time the melody is a little more interesting. Maybe it's because we have more people involved in the process. Okay, all right. And that's the facilitator's job at the end. So that's the ways we've been incorporating SEL, right? Just like diving it into the process, using it as an assessment tool, not for a grade. I would not want to see people grading people on this, but definitely be intentional about the assessment, right? And helping students to understand the way they work and how to get better. And then what can you do with all those skills outside of the music classroom? Well, it's infinite. It's infinite. It's infinite.
And those infinite things have been things that we've advocated for decades as benefits of music education. And now we're finding a space to realize that advocacy statement. So many things that you just said, it's a masterclass on how to embed so many of these things that we're talking about as buzzwords into our musical artistic process. I often talk about practice records as being permission to lie. And I can't think of anything that would be worse to developing that relationship of trust, that sense of belonging. You talk about taking 15 more seconds. Time, it's this mystical thing that's like, oh, if I give up that 15 seconds, the piece isn't going to be clean enough for the... No, when we start to wrap our heads around this. And in the end, there were 2 things that were just the biggest takeaways for me, is that it's giving our students choices and it's amplifying their voices. And in the end, to me, that's the equation that leads to empowerment, that we're unearthing this power that exists into our students. It can't be something that we give students. We don't say, poof, you're empowered. It's a space that we're facilitating an environment where they can unearth the power that exists within themselves. So what does student empowerment mean to you? I know this is near and dear to your heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. I'll answer that. So what does student empowerment mean to me? There's something very interesting because there is a racial equity principle that is adopted from the disability justice movement, and that is nothing about us without us. Which means when you are creating plans for me, there's no surprise parties, okay? Don't just ask me what I want to do. Don't just inform me, right? Don't just kind of consult with me. Let me be a part of the process to the point where I also can make decisions. And I shape the space according to my needs. I'm included. That's what inclusion is, right? I'm also a part of the way that decisions are made. I'm going to say young people deserve that as well. Young people deserve the right to shape their learning experiences and for them to shift. And in order to do that, as a teacher, it takes practice, because that's not the teaching I ever saw modeled. if you had asked me when I was younger, I would have said, I don't want that kind of teaching. I want a teacher who's, okay. So, yeah. So it's not what I've seen. It's not what, has been valued in the spaces I've been in. But it has been valued in non-classical music spaces that I've been in. Where this idea of, at church, yeah, there's a music director at my church. But people could make ideas and make suggestions about what songs they wanted to sing and kind of be like, oh, I don't think we should sing that. People could also make ideas and suggestions and be like, you know what? I don't think that chord, I don't think that's it. I think, I think it goes like this. And people are like, oh, really, really? I mean, there was much more democratization. And also, the choir director wasn't the only person conducting. It was usually someone who's interested in conducting could, take some extra time to learn. It would not be, and who was better at it, right? So it would not be unusual it's not unusual to go to Black churches and see kids conducting the choir. Because number one, they've been in church 1,000 hours since they were babies. It's not unusual for them to be playing the drums, be the drummer, and be better than the adults. That happens a lot, all right? So this idea of just like, there's not as many limitations on who kids are out in community spaces. Then they come to school and we're telling them what they can and can't do. So I think that's what youth empowerment means to me. It's like, how can we represent that democratization that we say is great, even in educational spaces, by giving students, releasing some of the power and control that we have in classrooms inherently because we're the teachers, and spreading it to them, allowing them to make more decisions. And the other thing I want to say about SEL is one of my little things I like to say is the best way to elevate your students' SEL is for you to elevate your own. So, and that, fits for, I think, artistic processes too. But for SEL, like, we've got to get in a space as educators and adults where we are modeling for students what it's like to collaborate with colleagues, what it's like to be aware of what you need for yourself, of some self-care, right? What it's like to express yourself when you're angry, okay? Not holding things in, but expressing different kinds of emotions with respect for others. We've got to model that for kids before we start, trying to ask kids to do it. And I think when we integrate it into the process, and then teachers are also being intentional about it. This is a skill we're building at this time. So we're modeling, okay, we're all in this piece of repertoire. We're building this skill that everyone participates. So that means I can't just call my favorites. The ones who raise their hand first. Okay, I'm gonna have to be intentional about giving some more teacher wait time so that some kids that raise their hands slower can participate. Okay, I'm gonna do that. Okay, that. And then we can ask the students to do it. That doesn't mean you have to tell the students what you're doing, because that's none of their business, to be quite frank. But you could, just be like, did everyone notice how everyone's participating? You could, but you don't have to. But that keeps your pedagogy also continuing to elevate. So it's about, just sharing space with kids. And when we start talking, it's not just when people start talking about power and reallocating power, people start going, what kind of justice? I don't know if I meant that kind of, I don't know if I mean all that. So that's important for us to know. That happens in other types of justice spaces, and in classrooms it happens as well. It's like the kids, we can't have the kids running things. Well, yes, you can. They can't run everything. Over time they could. We have a lot to learn, I think, from out of school time programs and the way that they operate, and the youth leadership models that they have. The same kids that you're saying can't run things, in their home communities, they're participating in an after school program where they're running the activities. They're scheduling, they're making the schedules at the Boys and Girls Club and doing this and doing that. The same kids that you're saying, like, aren't capable of, like, working in small groups, So, yeah, young people are capable of a lot of things. They're capable of a lot of things.
We don't like to hear it, but we're the ones holding them back.
We are. It is. It's just true. When I was, Venezuela was another one of those places where I was like, oh, people were we went to this incredible choir program, kind of in Falcon, which is like kind of on the northern coast. Incredible choir program. And there was like a little kid conducting beautifully. And people were like, wow. But there was another Black woman in the cohort who went to Black church as well. When she was a kid, she was like, yeah, that's what kids do. Kids can conduct, but we don't see that in school. We don't see that. We don't say it's like, well, who can do it the best? Well, this kid's 12. They do it the best. They're better than you, so they get to conduct the piece. I don't know. Uh, right? That's okay. That's okay too. But there's leadership possibilities for everybody. And seeing kids just like really kind of push their potential. We can't forget, like, kids' brains are, more elastic than ours. So they're able to learn at a speed that feels very ridiculous to us when they're motivated to do that. Okay, that's how they know all the album comes out on Tuesday. All the middle school boys know all the lyrics by Thursday. Yeah, they were motivated to do that, but they can't memorize the history facts or whatever. You know what I mean? My mom used to say that to me. You better know that history class stuff. My mom never said this to me, but moms say it to people because my mom's gonna watch this and say, "I never said that," but people say it. You better know those history facts, like that album, like them songs, right? Because that's the thing. And like when kids are motivated to do something, there's rarely things that can stop them. So if we can harness that energy, that's part of the empowerment too. Is helping them to harness it and helping them figure out how to use it before it gets taken away from them. Because if they make the wrong choices, it'll be stripped away. They'll have no power.
Absolutely. And so much of what we're talking about right now with that empowerment, and you say if it's relevant to them, has to do in my world and in the language that I'm using right now is culturally relevant. Is this culturally relevant? So I think this is all related to what we're talking about, racial justice in our space
Sure.
and empowerment. And I know this is something that when I've heard you speak about it, I walk away with chills. So to me, how can we start to combine so many of these worlds? Because I think so many people are like, well, we're talking about SEL, we're talking about empowerment, we're talking about trauma informed, we're talking about racial justice.
Yeah, you have to do it all.
You have to do it all, but they're not
And you
mutually
can.
exclusive.
And you can. They're so connected. So, I think it's important when we talk about racial justice, I don't think people are as aware. I think people think schools are innocuous places because schools are not political spaces to our best. We try our best not to let the political process be a part of the school community, right? So people think schools are kind of innocuous places. It's like, no. Kids spend a third of their life asleep, just like all other people, and then they spend sometimes more than a third at school. Anybody who's ever taught anywhere that has kids knows sometimes during the school year you see the kids at your school more than you see your own children at home. Okay, so we spend a lot of time at school. A lot of the ideas that we have culturally about white supremacy come from school. And it's not everybody's throwing everybody under the bus, it's all of it together. Yes, it's the textbooks. Yes, it's the curriculum. Yes, it's the hidden curriculum, the way the facilities look, the materials that are on display, what's considered to be prized and valuable knowledge in the building. Yes, it's the biases of the teachers. Yes, it's the policies. Yes, it's all of it. It's all of it. So because we know that people will say, well, I don't think we need to focus on anti-racism in schools. I don't think schools are racist places, but they will acknowledge that, of course, we have a big issue with racism in our country. And they also will acknowledge in the same breath that the socialization of children happens at school. That's where you get socialized. Okay. So that's where we learn a lot of these ideas. On top of that, I don't know any person. I've never met a person who is Black, brown, Asian, or indigenous that doesn't have some racial trauma story, like a terrible racial trauma story from school, where just being sure, maybe overlooked, or people having low expectations for you, or reenacting slave dramas to learn about slavery. And these things are happening. I mean, I'm 40 years old. These things are still happening. We just had a case of that the other day. Slave yoga was the thing this summer. Some teacher was teaching slave yoga as a way to be culturally responsive to her students. She was like, well, they might want to enact what their ancestors were doing. I mean, I guess, would you do that towards children of other races? Would you take Jewish children and do that in connection with one of their most traumatic historical events like the Holocaust? No. But there's some disconnect when it comes to Black children and Blackness in general. It's a hard way. America has a hard problem with seeing Black people in their full humanity. So schools are not out of the equation on this. And I think the faster we get over that, and I've definitely had people that have said, like, when you say things like white supremacy, it hurts people's feelings. Teachers are doing their best. It's like, well, that doesn't really matter. If it hurts your feelings, I just can't be concerned. We're talking about actual harm that's happening to young people. Like kids are being harmed daily, right? The school to prison pipeline is a real thing. Girls are getting pushed out of school. So school push out for girls, that's a real thing. And it's based on racial biases that we have. It's not just based on like, oh, the curriculum is that. It's not just that. It's the whole thing is seething with understandings of white supremacy. And our arts classrooms are not exempt to that. Now that being said, for almost all kids, when I travel the state, and just a basic fact that we know, the arts classrooms in a building are often the most safe spaces for any child. Kids say that dollars to donuts. I like to have lunch with the choir teacher because it's, I feel really comfortable there. LGBTQ plus kids find it as an oasis away from bullying. Our English learners, right, find it as an oasis. When there's racial contentions in the building, we find that those kids often find it as an oasis. So we have an opportunity. Kids already see us as a refuge. I really have seen, in my experience, I've seen the arts teachers really, when they understand these two pieces, that their classroom is already a refuge for people and we still must do better. When they understand that, I've seen arts teachers really fly. We started in Maryland the first state-supported anti-racist academy for arts educators. So it's called AREAL, the Anti-Racist Educators in the Arts Learning Lab, and it was done in conjunction with arts education in Maryland schools. It was a true partnership. AIMS, as they're known, was led by Quanice Floyd. And so we collaborated. We had people interviewed and applied. And we had a cohort of 24 teachers and teaching artists who spent 6 months together learning about anti-racist strategies that they could use in their classroom to impact, yes, their pedagogy, but also policy and practice, right? And those teachers were hungry for that information. There was no barrier. There was just, I haven't encountered those barriers. Maybe, I don't know why, but I just haven't encountered that. I encounter folks who are just like, I just need some more skills. And those skills are directly applicable to your teaching. We're talking about, again, a shift in pedagogy, what you understand about education. When we act as though our learning spaces have no racism in them, it's just, you're just making a commitment to continuing to let racist ideologies take root in your classroom. And everyone has to, and we all live in the same galaxy together. And the ideas of white supremacy, the central idea is that white people deserve more, better, more incredible, a happier life, right? They deserve abundance, and that everyone else deserves less. That idea has been a part of so many of the heroes that we have in music. That's been a part of their worldview. Of course, that impacts the music. That idea is a part of many of the textbooks and the way we look back at history. How could that not drip down into the way that kids feel about themselves or the way that they interpret you feel about them? So, anti-racism is a buzzword. It's another buzzword, right? But it has real ramifications when we're not taking the time to elevate our own biases so that we can service all of our students, not in that way of like, I'm colorblind, I love all my kids. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you love them. But let's love them and serve them well by making sure that when we're interacting with kids and when we're building policies for kids, that we are not also unintentionally creating harm. Now, people who are intentionally creating harm, we don't care. We're not even worrying about those people. We're talking about people who are literally, just kind of rolling through. And most of those people are going to be white, because racism in and of itself makes it so that if you are white, if you are a person who has a dominant race identity, you don't think about race as much, right? So that's the caveat here, is that, you're like, well, I don't even see where to look. Well, yeah, that's intentional. That's intentional, because life is being some of those choice points are not part of the way that you have to live life. It doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it's not a part of your daily experience, So we know too that teachers are overwhelmingly white in America. Okay. So we know that there's an issue. We still live in a very segregated world. I don't know why people act like this, like they don't know these things. You go to church with people who look like you, most likely. The people, when you make a list of all the people who had dinner at your house in the last 4 years, I say four because 2 years of COVID, probably nobody. But in the last 4 years, you made a list of everybody who's come over to your house for dinner. Okay, that list is more likely to be the same color as your skin. That's just the more likely place. You're more likely to have close family friends and go on vacation with other people that look like you. You're more likely to just spend your time, your social time. Look at your Facebook pictures. Yeah. So we live in a segregated world still. There's less laws about segregation, but we still do segment ourselves in this way. So it takes effort. It does take effort for us to work interracially, and it can be done with beauty, right? And the last piece I'll say about this is we know I haven't met a single person in the world who doesn't think, wow, I wish the world was better. But we cannot make the world better without everyone. That's how it is. The world is so big. We need everyone to work together. And that only comes by us seeing the humanity in each other. And that's what racism takes away, is an opportunity to make the world better, because we can't see each other. We can't see each other without, I don't know, some filter between us. So, I'm excited to see a lot of arts. I know NAEA, for instance, has some really great things happening in equity, in equity, diversity, and inclusion. AEP is another organization, Arts Education Partnership. So there's lots of arts educators and organizations that are really taking this mantle and taking it seriously, and not letting the hype die down just because it's been 2 years, right? Understanding that this is a long road to create more justice in the world.
Alicia, just so powerful. And as you're saying, obviously, I identify as a white male. So when I'm starting to think about everything that you're saying, this is part of a journey that we're all on. And I was reading something on Facebook that really got me thinking in a way that from my identity, and it said something to the effect of equity for those with privilege feels like oppression because it's something that they've never had to engage with. And that's going to be an uncomfortable journey for many people. And
Yes. Yes, discomfort is often a sign to stop, right? That's in our bodies. I hurt my hand a couple years ago, and I went to the doctor to try to, figure out why my thumb wouldn't bend. And I said, when I do this, it really hurts. And he said, okay, well, that's easy. Just don't do that. So when we know that there's pain in the body, it's a moment. It's supposed to tell you to pause. Emotionally, we have intentionally built up these walls to create this discomfort around race that really doesn't need to be there. Race is not hard to understand. It's an imaginary system that was created to create powered structures of power. It's imaginary, something that was made up so that some people can guarantee that they and their progeny can have more things, and other people could intentionally have less. Okay, so we can all understand greed and capitalism. This is not hard. This is not hard to understand. But because of history and the way that that race has been passed down to us, it's connected with all of these emotional pieces. So I think it takes practice. I think that's what we found in the A Real Academy was just it was a intentionally called a learning lab, because it was like, let's practice having dialogue about race with people of different races that have the affinity that they care about creative education. It's like, okay, let's do that. Many of us talk about race with people who are the same race as us, but we don't really have those cross-racial conversations. Every time you do that, it's just like every time, when Tinkerbell would say, a fairy gets their wings, right? Every time you have a conversation interracially about racial justice, something shifts in the atmosphere from that. Because that's it's intended to keep us quiet. And the more we don't name something, right, the more we don't say what it is and just say what we're seeing, and then work on ways that means we can never work on ways to improve it and elevate it. So we're not getting anywhere by being silent. And I think that's one of the lessons from the murder of George Floyd, was that more people were like, wait, this is the most I can take. I can't stay silent any longer. I have to speak up. For our country to be in a place where a person could know they were being filmed and murder someone on film and know like nothing will happen. and not feel any sense of concern about a person losing their life, a place where that could happen, a country where that could occur, everybody would agree that's a country in turmoil. We have some changes we have to make here. And the vestiges of race, we've never as a country dealt with race. We never have. We've only learned more entrenched traditions about not talking about race with each other. And that has, allowed a lot of things to fester. So I'm excited when I see, for instance, music teachers working collaboratively with the artists in their communities, bringing teaching artists in. I'm excited when I see teachers open up the space and allow their students to lay out big ideas and questions that they want to explore as the catalyst for what's learned in the classroom. Like, all of those are great ways to invite inclusion in. Now, the other piece is that sits on the top. That's what you're teaching, right? But we still have to go a little further and deeper in terms of doing some internal work to evaluate and reflect on the biases that we hold. Now, the cool thing about, us as artists is we know how to reflect. We know how to reflect. We know how to be reflective. The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron says if you're an artist, you would write 3 reflection pages every morning, right? That's what artists do best, is reflect. When you go see some famous artists exhibit in a museum, they have tons of notebooks. Because that's what artists do. They fill moleskins. That's what artists do. So we can, that's our inheritance, is reflection. And so reflection can really help us to elevate the way that we show up in the world, be more human.
And Alysia, reflection for the good of better knowing ourselves, our identity, better knowing the sense of belonging that we're coming together. Alysia, this has just been such a powerful conversation about what's in your heart and how social and emotional learning, racial justice, and everything else that we're talking about in our world. I feel leaving this conversation that especially the students who you work with, the teachers you work with, I'm optimistic about the future. And thank you so much for everything that you've given to our profession and for sharing this time with us. Alysia, from the bottom of my heart, an amazing, amazing episode. Such a gift. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you today.
Absolutely. Please be well. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Alysia Lee for sharing with us the necessity for us to tackle challenging situations, for us to embed creativity, to amplify student voice, to provide a space in our classrooms to uncover the power that our students hold within them. When we limit our music classrooms to performance, it's a challenge. When we embrace creativity, SEL becomes something that is not only doable, but it enhances and it moves us forward to a space that we all want to be in. For Music for All, I'm Scott Edgar. Thank you very much.
From Music for All and our national presenting sponsor, the Yamaha Corporation of America, thank you for joining us for this episode of Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music. Yamaha is your partner in music education, not just through instruments and professional audio, but also through teacher resources and support. Visit YamahaEducatorSuite.com as your go-to source for your music program needs and professional development. Music for All's mission is to create, provide, and expand positively life-changing experiences through music for all. Our vision is to be a catalyst to ensure that every child across America has access and opportunity to participate in active music making in their scholastic environment. We are extremely grateful for any donations gifted to our nonprofit organization. If you enjoyed this episode of Teaching Social Emotional Learning Through Music, and in order for us to continue providing our free educational resources and advocacy materials, please consider giving to Music for All in any amount at musicforall.org/give.